Well, we got another great guest joining us. You might recognize him from a previous episode. Would you like to reintroduce yourself?
I'm Donovan, and despite the longer hair, I am the same person. My 4-year-old nephew had some trouble with that. Um, but yeah, that's who I am.
Oh, recently me and Donovan have struck up a relationship because, us fantasy winners, we make a pretty legit power couple.
Yeah, and it just doesn't work. Like, because if you're with someone who's not also a fantasy powerhouse, they're going to be jealous. The relationship's not going to work. But we just understand each other.
Exactly.
Okay, well, if you can quit bragging about all the money you took from me for just a second.
Wait, I didn't get money for beating you in fantasy. This seems unfair.
I did.
I'm taking my anger out on the both of you. So yes, you beat me. I'm glad we established that. Now, Donovan, we love listening to you talk. Do you have anything to say?
Just in general.
Yeah, just in general. I mean, I know you kind of sent you kind of were talking earlier or texting earlier about kind of the state of our democracy and also about the state of, social media and
Yeah.
how it's been playing out.
So I guess I like a lot of people have talked about this, how like social media is really good at creating silos because algorithms based on what you've clicked on before like to send you more sensationalist and more, stuff that will make you angry and make you share it. And I don't think it creates this trend in human behavior, but it certainly accelerates it where people sort of create their own alternate realities. And like having all this technology is great because like people can make random podcasts or tell stories that, when only one dominant source of media, stories, just a lot of stories are being ignored and other stories can be told. But a lot of like complete bullshit can also be said and made to look really realistic. And so people just create these separate realities, and like there's a large portion of the population where nothing I say or nothing anyone says will convince them because they have all of this content, this entire ecosystem of stuff they've learned. And like any of the actual issues that affect people in the real world, like poverty or crime or climate change and stuff, I don't think we as a country or like a species can actually address those effectively if we don't find a way to break down, like if you don't find a way to create consensus verified facts. Because whether or not a policy is succeeding or whether or not there's a problem to be solved, like you can't solve a problem if you're not agreeing it's there. And so like I don't necessarily have a solution, but I think that is the central problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, going off like the whole social media thing, like yes, there are a lot of different viewpoints and they're allowed this portrayal. But I think that's a conversation that's especially like prominent right now since Trump just got banned from Twitter, got permanently suspended. So like is it more of an issue where just like people need to stop? You think that people need to stop spreading lies? And like we need to cut down on misinformation like this instance of Twitter suspending? Like does there need to be more censorship? Or is it more of just like people need to be more educated?
I mean, well, that's like the tough part, right? Because there are, trolls and, intentional disinformation campaigns, but for the most part, a lot of people like believe what they're sharing or posting. Like that's why they're saying it. And like I want to say like I can be an arbiter of truth and tell you what's incorrect, but like they won't trust me on that. So I think like I would like to see platforms do more fact checking and stuff, but that only works if you get a large enough body of people who are willing to accept that the fact checkers are like fair arbiters of fact.
Yeah, I think you bring up kind of a good point, and there is something to be said for like on the one hand, we definitely need some sort of team that is, ensuring that there is some validity to everyone who's trying to share, facts, right? But at the same time, do we really want, Twitter to be the decider of what is or is not a fact, or right, or what is or is not real? And right, like, do we really want to give Twitter the sole responsibility of censorship? So I think it is a difficult question because we want to balance, regulation with also personal responsibility. And that's something that's like incredibly difficult because personal responsibility is not something that Americans seem to be typically, capable of. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's really tough.
That's like, so for before Twitter, suspended and then has now banned Trump, what they were doing was the little info box, like, this contains information that others have disputed or that has no evidence or something, and would link you to other things to read. And I, like, that seems to me like that's a pretty good solution. They're not like completely hiding it, and they're just trying to move the discussion to a more factual place. But they've been doing that for like 2 or 3 months, and this has still culminated in people storming the Capitol, and like in that same Twitter ecosystem where a lot of these plans, like, things were posted. And if one platform, Twitter, does then say, okay, well, information's not working, we're going to ban it, they'll just move to other platforms. And so I guess to go back to Jack's original question about like people needing to be better educated, like, I think we as a society need to be, like, I think it actually does start with schools in a lot of ways. And
Are you saying that schools should teach people how to use social media?
well, not well, yes and no, but I think schools need to make sure that people are getting more adequate, like, critical thinking skills in general, because a lot of the same skills that apply to thinking about, does this make sense, are there multiple sources saying this, does the outlet I'm reading like have a particular bias, are the sort of things like they try to teach you in DBQs and AP classes. And a lot of time, like, people, in a lot of classes, the classic question that people ask teachers is like, when am I going to need to know this? And like sometimes the teachers have like, well, here's a job where you might need to know this equation, or like, here's an inspirational thing about knowledge is power. But like sometimes some teachers just like, I don't know, there, you probably don't, and I think that misses the point sometimes. And like, we all went to the same school, which had a pretty high rate of funding per student, and so I think we had more exposure to those sorts of things. But as a country, we've been defunding education at all levels for like 50 years.
So I know that you were kind of saying earlier about how kind of you were saying the central problem is our inability as a society to collectively say like whether or not this is a fact. Do you think that our ability to our trust in institutions as a whole affects that, like the trust we have in the institution of government or the institution, right, or social media companies? Are Do you think that has anything to play with our ability to, come to a consensus on what is a fact?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a core tenet of American thought to be skeptical of the government in a lot of ways. And yeah, I think it's interesting how sometimes like our ideological labels get kind of messy, in that people who are, this is a little bit of a tangent, but people who are the most anti-government are often the most pro-police, despite them being like one of the most tangible forms of government force. And then a lot of people who are very much anti-corporations are, and like large concentrations of power, are telling Facebook and Twitter to like use their economic platform to, influence behavior by demonetizing people. And then another example is like Republicans freak out whenever Twitter bans someone, even though like they're a corporation. If they think it's better for them to ban someone, the typical Republican thought is to do that. And so like I think Americans across the political spectrum are very skeptical of most things that could present them a fact.
So yeah, I agree that it's kind of like, it's kind of all about convenience, where, you just like, if something works in your like benefit, you're gonna agree with it more likely, and if something works against it, you're gonna disagree with it, which is why you see like some of these kind of like, more ironic like issues, like with, people being pro-police but anti-government. It's just kind of, it's interesting to see, because it's also, I mean, we're seeing it real time, where it's like, it was convenient for like these people who, who rioted on the Capitol and broke in. It was like convenient for them earlier to be like, oh yeah, blue lives matter, but then they just like disregard what the police have to say. So I mean, it's really impossible to address, because it's just, I think it's an ideology that like all humans have, is to just, whatever you believe, like it's just kind of working to your, I don't know how I want to say this, but it's really like, ultimately I feel like politics these days is all about convenience, where like you're just gonna side with the ideology or theory or belief that like works to your advantage, especially from politicians' standpoint. It's like, that's how like they get reelected, and that's how like they can advance into higher positions, is just by like working their way up the system by doing what's most convenient to them, which is a real issue if you think about it, because like there's not really a certain set of standards that we like are that they're all abiding by. So it's like kind of hard to like really trust what your politicians are saying to you,
Especially if your senator is Josh Hawley.
especially if your senator
Especially if your
is Josh Hawley.
senator is Josh Hawley.
You bring up, Donovan, you bring up some very good points. This was a great conversation. Enjoyed having you back on. As a real hoot.
Yes, thank you.
I just regret not having a Photoshop bodybuilder as my background.
Don't we all?
Oh no.